Thank you, everyone, and thank you for sticking around to this lecture because I know it's the last lecture of the day, so you all must be very tired. And don't worry, this lecture will actually not be a technical one. When deciding what I wanted to do for this event, I thought about different things that I didn't know when I was starting as a concept artist. So that was like 11 years ago. So I had no idea what an indie studio was at all. And I mean, I knew there were smaller studios, but I had no idea that they were called indie studios, what the differences between indie studios, AAA are, and things like that. So I decided to make this lecture more of a lesson of what you can expect when you start in the gaming industry and the differences between different types of studios, different types of workflows, different types of management, and basically all the pitfalls you might be able to experience during your next few years in the game dev industry. So, although I already had a small introduction, let me still introduce myself. My name is Boris Stoyanov, and I am currently the creative lead at Kipi Interactive. I have been doing concept art and background design for 11 years. I graduated from the UK in 2012. Shortly after that, I started working as a concept artist in a small studio that had about 12 people. I worked there on a mobile game for a few years. Then I jumped to freelance and contractor work for around 6 or 7 years. In that time, I worked on animations. I worked on small indie project type games. I worked as an illustrator on stuff. So basically, I've done most of what you can expect a freelancer to do. I specialized mainly in background design for animations. I produced 2 pilots and worked on a Cartoon Network show for a while. So this was very fun. And in the meantime, I actually met Viktor Kitipov, who made the Kipi Interactive Studio. And we started working together on a freelance basis, a project here, a project there. And at one point, he said, well, do you want to go full-time? And I was like, well, I mean, I have no other projects right now, so why not? Let's do it. So I started working full-time as a concept artist at Kipi Interactive about, I think, 5 years ago now. And we've worked on Cryo War, which is one of our upcoming projects. And we also have another big project in the works that unfortunately I can't share anything about, and it's killing me because it's pretty awesome, but hopefully, next time we have a lecture, I'll be able to show off some work there. So this is my work history. And the interesting thing is, in all that time, even though when I graduated, I wanted to go into a bigger studio, you know, work on the next Assassin's Creed, the next God of War, something like that. Things didn't really work out that way. And I started working with small teams. And at one point, I stayed working with small teams. And it actually became a choice because a few years ago, I had this choice to make where I could go work for a bigger studio, but I didn't want to. And this was very interesting for me because I actually liked working with a small team much more than I thought I would like working with a bigger team and you know, a bigger brand name game. And I want to share why that is. So, a few things first. What are the differences between indie studios and AAA studios? So, material-based, general management and direction, project types, personal fulfillment, which is actually very important, and finally, what risks you can expect when working in this industry. Especially the last few years have proven to be very risky, even if you're working in a bigger studio. So, let's start. Material base. Well, what can you expect in a bigger studio? So bigger studios generally have more money. I mean, obviously. That would mean a few very key things. When you start in a bigger studio, you will definitely expect to have a desk, a PC, a monitor, basically a space that you can go into and start working at, which is great. In an indie studio, that's not always a given. Because my first experience working in an indie studio, I had to work for about 3 months off of a tennis table, which was pretty awesome, honestly. And we did use it to play tennis from time to time when we, you know, took our laptops in our bags and everything like that. But the thing is, even though they needed to hire more people, They didn't have the space and the budget to give us desks, to give us PCs, to give us monitors, to give us anything basically. So I had to go in with my laptop and work on this folded table for about 2 months with another colleague. Well, 2 to 3 months. Great team building exercise, by the way, but it was a bit jarring in the beginning. And this is something very key for indie studios, even though indie studios tend to grow. So a few months after that, I got my desk, I got my PC, I could work normally. We got art books, we got things like that, and it was awesome. But in the beginning, it wasn't like that. So indie studios tend to have these lower beginnings and they build up over time. And this is actually something that we've done in Kipi, because when we started, we were, what, 2, 3 people? Now we're 12 people with additional freelancers who come into the office, work with us. So we're slowly growing, but it is something to keep in mind when you're starting in the industry. So the bigger studios, they will have these libraries of art books or books about coding or all of that. They will have these elaborate retreats for the team, and basically they can afford it. So they will try to pamper you, which is great to have. The thing is, it's a bit superficial because you are hired to do a particular task. So having a gaming room is absolutely great if you had the time to use it. And most of the time, you won't have the time to use it. At the end of a very tiring workday, you will actually want to go home and not stick around in the gaming room and stay in the office. So even though it's a bonus, it's a superficial one. Still, it's a bit jarring when you go into the office and you're working cramped with other people like this, and everything is basically on top of your head, with PCs, monitors, and things like that. But that doesn't make it bad. And it's usually a place that will eventually grow into something better, which is something, again, to keep in mind. Now, general management and direction. What you can expect in bigger studios is a very rigid system of how they manage their projects, which is great. So you will have different leads, art directors, managers, creative leads, and so on, depending on the size of the studio, because here we're talking from 50 to 500 people, you have a pretty big and pretty well-made management system of how everything will happen. And what you can expect in an indie studio is none of that at all. Most indie studios don't really have that many people, so you will be expected to self-manage a lot of the time. You might not have a producer, which means that even more of that self-management falls on you. And generally, you will have a good feel of where things are going, but this will come from communication with your team and not because a manager is there to tell you you need to do these and these tasks and this time. So again, keep in mind. Project types, these are pretty self-explanatory. So bigger studios definitely have bigger, more well-known projects because they have a lot of money for marketing purposes. Smaller studios tend not to have that. Now, the cool thing is, in a smaller studio, you actually have a bigger say-so on the project and the decision-making process. In a bigger studio, you have a small role that you fulfill, and then when the project comes out, you say, oh, yes, I worked on the last God of War, and I made this bucket over there. And it's the most awesome bucket in the universe because I spent 3 months on it. Not necessarily what's going to happen, but it can happen. And this does matter when we get to personal fulfillment. Because here, every one of you needs to ask themselves, what types of games do I want to make? And what type of acknowledgement do I want to get from these games? It's really about personal choice. Do you want to make this big game and say, I've worked on this awesome thing with a 500 team studio, or I did this with just 5 people and we worked our asses off? Now, I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I'm saying that it's very much up to how you feel. And this is based on a conversation I had with a colleague about 2 weeks ago when speaking about this lecture. And his point of view is that you definitely need those few bigger projects in your career so you can feel fulfilled. And I argued that you don't actually need any big projects in your career to feel fulfilled. It's the work that you do and the colleagues the friends you make along the way and things like that that bring me fulfillment. So we were at the standpoint because his fulfillment wasn't the same as mine. So I'm guessing each one of you here will definitely see things differently based on what you want to do. So it's a hard question to ask yourself, and you can ask it every few years. And this is why I put this, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And you don't have to answer working for Blizzard, working for Ubisoft, or working for whatever brand name there is. You can change your mind at any point, at any time, which is great. So if something isn't fulfilling for you, you can change it. You can go to another studio, find a different thing that makes you feel happy, because after all, most of us get into gaming because we like games and we want to be proud of what we make and we want to have fun while doing it. Because if you're not having fun while developing a game, well, then you're doing it wrong. That doesn't mean that there aren't horrible moments when developing games. Believe me, there are, and we'll get to that. But overall, each one of you should ask yourself, what exactly is it that you want to do and how? So, risks. Now, bigger studios tended to have lower risks of you losing your job and the project being canceled. Unfortunately, the last few years have changed that drastically, and right now the industry is very uncertain, which is a shame. Smaller studios have much higher risks of projects not getting properly funded or being canceled, and that is always troublesome, because you go into a studio, you put in your best work that you can produce, and then because of something that isn't really up to you, the project gets canceled and you actually get stranded without a job, which can be pretty horrible. So how can you prepare for that? And I will get into that a little bit later as well. But honestly, how do you prepare for that? You should be able to do more than just your little thing. In my case, my little thing is concept art, especially environment concept art. And my way of preparing of project cancellation or me losing my job is actually doing character artwork, doing everything with art that I can, be that marketing, prop design, environment, or character. But also things that go a little bit beyond. So that might be a little bit of 3D work, getting to know how an engine works, getting to know how levels are lighted up and things like that. So you have a better understanding of your projects and what a studio might need. So it's not necessarily guaranteed that will get you a new job, but it will be much easier to get a new job because now you're more valuable. And I know that takes time. And it's pretty horrible because that means that I won't be as good as I could be as a concept artist, because now I have to put time and hours into something else. But at the same time, I have a better understanding on how projects work and what studios might need. So it's something to think about. If you were working in a bigger studio, usually you would be focusing on one or two things. But again, with an uncertain market, I would definitely caution everybody here to try and achieve new skills and more like attain new skills and work on that. So, getting to it, surviving at an indie game dev studio. Again, I'll be going through a few things, mostly talking. Sorry, there aren't many concept art, JPEGs, and things like that in this presentation. I just wanted to share things that I wish I knew when I started out. So, general direction and what to know. Generally, as I mentioned, most studios probably won't be having too many managers, if any at all. And depending on the studio you work with, and depending on what you're doing, let's say for concept art, there's a high probability that you won't have an art director, which means that the whole team will try to decide together what the art direction of a certain game is and how that would work. And this is drastically different from what you would get at a bigger studio, where you would have a dedicated art director and senior concept artists and leads. And that goes for game mechanics, that goes for level design, that goes for everything. So you won't have that much of a general specified direction, but you will get it through working with your team. Again, this takes a person who is really ready to adapt to the whole situation and who is ready to find themselves more tasks when they're done with their current ones. And it's a particular mindset. If you're coming from work from a bigger studio, this is not something most people are used to. So what do you need to know? Well, you need to know how the whole process works. You need to talk about every part of the project with your colleagues so you get a better understanding of what you need to do and how you need to do it. And especially in most cases, you need to do it very fast because indie game dev usually doesn't have that much money. So we need to make a product as fast as we can, as best as we can, and get it out the door. And this is basically how it is. So the more information you have, the better you are going to be at your job. That applies to all the skills I just mentioned a little before, that it's probably a good idea for you to have at least a basic idea of what level design is, lighting is, and all of these things. So when you have to do, let's say, a piece of concept art, you know exactly how the 3D environment artist is going to turn it and how he's going to model it in a way that's super efficient and super fast. So I don't have to do the whole concept of the whole thing. I just need to do a part that I will give him and he will turn that into a whole mesh. So efficiency is key here. So adaptability. I already talked about this, but it's actually pretty funny. As I mentioned, in an indie studio, you need to work very fast and you need to juggle a lot of things. So here we have marketing materials, then environment exploration, then environment sketches, then monster sketches, then character sketches, then overpaint, and all of these can happen in the same week. Sometimes most of them can happen in the same day. So you need to switch tasks pretty fast. You need to be ready to do that. And you need to be very adaptable with your art styles. Now, this is especially for concept artists, but that would go for programming as well, because if the project needs something very specific right now, you need to put everything else to the side, jump to the next thing, start working on that. So adaptability is key, and you need to be ready to do that because, again, people coming from bigger studios who are used to a more rigid scheduling type of system, they don't usually want to work in this particular way. So that is not to say that most people are like that, but I have had colleagues who would just say, no, I'm going to finish this job first and then I'm going to jump to the next one. And that's an issue because no, you can't, we need the next one. You're blocking someone right now. So you need to do this task and you can't be stubborn about this. So it needs to happen. It's basically what's driving the studio forward. So this is something to really keep in mind when trying to work in an indie studio and trying to adapt to the process in the indie studio. And yeah, management style and pipelines. So we have simple, you do the job you're hired to do, nothing more. We have complex, you do the job with additional tasks, but at least all of them are in the same field. And then we have indie game dev. You do the job, also this other job, also this other job, all of them, different fields, different levels of complexity, everything happening all at once. So basically what I just described in the other side, in the other slide, when doing indie game dev, and dealing with a small team, you will probably need to jump and do a few things. In my case, this was juggling level design and concept artwork. So I wasn't a level designer, but because we needed one really fast and all other people from the team were very busy, I was the only one who actually had some time on my hand. So I had to learn a little bit of level design so I could juggle concept art and level design, then lighting, then at one point blueprints, which is basic programming in Unreal Engine. So that was horrible, being an artist, but it needed to be done. And I was the only one who actually had the time to do it. and I was ready to adapt to it because honestly, we didn't have a choice. I wanted to get this project out the door, so I needed to do something to help my team because all of us were really pressed at the time. So yeah, you need to keep that in mind. Something like this actually happened years ago when I was working in animation. So the simple type is you get hired to do the job. So in my case, it was just backgrounds, and I was hired to do the backgrounds. I had basic sketches for them. I had the color palette I needed to use. I did them. The job was done. Everyone was happy. All good. Then comes the complex one. So you have basic sketches, but they want the sketches to be renewed a little bit. You have no color palette, so you need to think of one that actually works for the project. And then you need to do all the backgrounds, put them into pieces so they can be used in animation and stuff like that. So more complex. And indie game dev, as I described, can be extremely complex and can have different fields weaved into it. So it's extremely interesting, at least for me, because I didn't actually think that I liked learning new things before I needed to learn level design. And then I found that I actually enjoy working with Unreal Engine. I enjoy doing the level design work. I enjoy helping people from my team do their job better. And in the end, I actually had a better understanding of what we needed to do. So that started transitioning into my concept artwork. So now I could put a level together, overpaint it, and produce it much faster than I could before, which was great, especially for a small team. That is a must. Now, team play. From what I've said until now, you can gather that I really like my team. And when you have a small team as ours, you need to know everybody who's in it. And you need to be at least on friendly terms, because these are the people you will be seeing every day. And these are the people who will be giving you feedback and who you'll be giving feedback to. So it's very important to put your ego aside, to recognize that all the work these people are doing is extremely valuable and is just as valuable as the work you're doing, and that you are all in this together as a team. This should go without saying, I know that. And at the same time, a lot of people don't treat it like that. A lot of people want to start working in an indie studio because it's easier than working in a bigger studio, and then not communicate with their team at all. And I've seen that happen. A colleague in the past in another studio just decided that he was going to do his own things to the side. He wouldn't talk to anybody. He didn't care what anybody was doing. He didn't care to help out the team, even though he had time, because he didn't have any tasks available. And yeah, this isn't a proper way to work in an indie game dev environment. You need to be a strong team to actually be able to produce anything of value. And honestly, it's quite awesome, because in my time in Kipi, putting aside the level design stuff, I've actually worked closely with our game designer, and he's been a very helpful person to me, especially giving me feedback, trying to push my work in a direction that would go better for the game, which was quite awesome. I've worked with our programmers quite a lot, and I have a better understanding of how and why certain systems in our game work, and how these can be improved. And even though I am an artist and sometimes have stupid ideas about what could work in a game, through these stupid ideas, I have actually managed to give them some ideas that were, reworked, made smarter, and put in the game. So you need to treat your team with care, and you need to appreciate what everybody in your team is doing. Again, it should go without saying, but still. So work environment. Sorry for using the same picture, by the way. Even though I'm talking about how much we're a great team, we don't actually have pictures together, which is just mind-blowing to me. Work environment is actually very important, because what I just described is where we are today, but it isn't where we were when we started work at Kipi, because most of my colleagues were coming from bigger studios. So none of them were used to working indie, except me. And at one point, all of them were just doing their jobs and not talking to each other. I mean, sure, we had lunch together, but I got no feedback on the sketches I was doing other than, yeah, looks cool or make it look cool. Great, that doesn't actually work for me at all. So we needed to communicate more, and I spent a lot of time bugging the hell out of them to actually give me more, to talk about more about this process, to ask them questions about their work and why they're doing certain things. And slowly in time, we changed our work environment, and it's definitely something that is up to you. Even if you were in a bigger team, in a bigger studio, this can be harder to do, but at the same time, let's say you're in a AAA studio, 500 people, and you have an art team or a programmer team or game design team that's about 10 people, and you don't communicate well. You can change that. It's not going to happen overnight, but it definitely can happen, and it should happen, because it's going to make work more fun, and it's going to make it work faster and more efficient. So it's something that you need to do for your own sanity, really, and for the sanity of your colleagues, you know. And yeah, finally, the final section of this presentation, burnout. So I don't know how many of you have worked how much in the industry, but each one of us at one point hits this moment of burnout, and it can be very daunting. And the first time I hit it, I had taken 3 freelance projects that unfortunately at the time had these annoying applications that took a screenshot of your computer every 10 minutes. And I had to work 80 hours for 3 weeks, 80 hours each week. So that was mind-blowingly horrible. Basically, I slept, I worked, I slept, I worked, I ate somewhere there, I don't even remember when. And when everything was done, I went to the store, and exiting the building, it was like someone handed me a joystick. I transitioned to third person, and I was trying to make Bobby go to the store and buy stuff. It was horrible. It was complete disassociation from myself. I had no idea what was happening. I didn't feel my legs. I didn't feel my arms. It was so concerning that I wasn't sure that there wasn't something something wrong with my brain at that point. And in a few days, that went away. And I was, okay, so I shouldn't work that hard for that long. That's cool. I'll make it happen. So the next time that happened, I actually knew how to deal with that, even though, again, it happened. So I didn't really learn my lesson. And in time, working in this industry, there will be crunch periods, and each one of us will be entering a burnout period. The problem with burnout is it mirrors depression quite closely. So there's dissociation. Things that usually are fun won't be fun at all. You won't want to play games. Your hobbies won't be fun. You wouldn't want to go outside and do things that actually make you happy, because your brain is so overloaded with information that it actually needs to stop and look at the wall for 2 days for it to get back to normal. And in time, this gets very tricky to deal with, especially with chronic burnout, because you're trying your best for the project, you're overworking yourself, and then you're trying your best because there's a new deadline, and constantly going at it. And at one point, it can really damage your physical well-being, especially, and your mental one. So what can we do about it? Well, I mean, taking breaks is pretty obvious. Now, taking short breaks during the day, especially if you're working from home, can be very beneficial. Like, just take a nap. Take a 20-minute nap in the middle of the day, and you will definitely be working better after it, because your brain had actually some time to reload, rather than you trying to force it to work for those 20 minutes and going nowhere. You can do sports. This always helps, because it kind of helps you with getting your mind together and trying to exert you physically rather than mentally, which the work usually does. You can try to engage yourself in other activities while you work. For me, it helps to just listen to an audiobook or just watch something to the side. And I know that's not going to work for everybody, especially programming. You guys won't be able to do that at all, and I'm sorry for that. But for art, something that keeps a part of my mind occupied with something completely different helps me get through a 12-hour day when I need to get through a 12-hour day and not deal with the burnout of hyper-focusing on one task. And honestly, the best thing you can do is just take a vacation. Just take a week off when you feel that you can't really do anything of value for yourself, for the team, for the project. And that's not always possible, unfortunately. And we kind of need to we need to mitigate the burnout before we can get to that vacation. And that can be quite hard. You should try to find something that works for you, that gets your mind at ease. And that's a good way to soldier through this period. Now, here comes the hard part. What if this period doesn't stop? So a lot of companies, a lot of big ones, have actually had these type of things happen, where an art director, after the project is done, just disappears for 3 months. And after 3 months, he comes back and he had actually checked himself in a mental institution because he was completely burned out and he was out of his mind. Yeah, actually well-documented shit. So this is something to keep in mind, that it does happen. And if you are in an environment that doesn't stop this type of work, that wouldn't let you take this week off, or wouldn't recognize that you need the time off to recharge because you're at your limit, you always have the freedom to say no. You can always change your job. Now, I'm not advocating for anyone here to just quit their job. But if the burnout is starting to affect you physically and mentally, you have that freedom to change your job. It's very important for everybody to remember that, because when we are in the thick of it, when we are pressed against the wall, when we're burned out, this isn't actually a thought that comes into our heads, because we are burned out. We're not really all there at that moment. So keep that in mind. And as a sending thing, few last words, I would say. Now, something from my experience. I have no idea how many of you want to work in bigger studios. But the unfortunate thing is, it's not always possible to start there, especially in the beginning of our careers. So definitely consider trying for indie gaming, because indie studios are constantly looking for people of all sorts, of all levels of professionality. So even if your dream of starting in the biggest AAA studio doesn't come through, try the little ones. And honestly, the experience you'll be getting there, even though it won't be super specialized, will definitely serve you better than the experience of starting in a bigger studio your first few years. Just because you will learn much more about how to make games, much more about how your colleagues work, much more about how you can actually make your work faster, more enjoyable, and more proficient. So with that said, thank you for your time.
Okay. I was really thinking about asking you one question, and I'm tempted to not, how to say, please don't take it personally, but did you ever thought about leaving the industry with all that said?
Completely leaving the industry?
Yeah.
That depends, because leaving the gaming industry,
yes.
Sure. But leaving the entertainment industry, no. Because I spent quite a bit of time working, as I mentioned, as a background artist for animation, and that was quite enjoyable, although I decided that wasn't really my thing. So I wanted to focus more on gaming, which I was doing at the time, on the side. So again, even with all that said, right now, I don't think I would quit the gaming industry, because I know things can be changed, and I know things can be worked on. So even if you're starting in a studio that's absolutely awesome, but the people are even though they're great, they have no complete idea what they're doing. This can change and they can grow, and you can be a part of that. And that actually makes me really, really happy. And that's the part of personal fulfillment I was mentioning before.
Yeah, that sounds great. Do you think that changing so fast the context in a work in the indie studio, is this a benefit actually, or do you think it, let's say, it makes people burn out faster when they have long weeks with so many context changes?
It can definitely make people burn out faster. That's for sure. And this is why we need to very properly communicate and self-manage our tasks. So even though you have to make a lot of context changes, those context changes are as close to each other as they can be. So let's say exploration for a color background and exploration for a background that's for 3D modeling in this case. These are close enough so the change isn't that horrible. But yeah, they can definitely cause burnout faster. And people working in indie studios should definitely be aware of that.
Yeah, it really sounds that the team has to care about itself.
Absolutely. And you need to have someone from the team who has your back and who can actually take on a task if you can't or help you with it. So it goes faster and it goes away faster.
Yeah. All right. Are there questions in the audience that somebody would like to ask? All right. Just I'll let her ask first. There you go.
Thank you. So I had a question. Have you ever had a situation in which you're working on a project and you're so overwhelmed by it, you kind of get a burnout, but the signs of it are the opposite of what a normal burnout is? So basically, you're too overexcited. You are so worried about that project that your mind is occupied with just thoughts about it, and you can't rest or you can't even breathe normally. And if you had, how do you usually deal with that kind of situations?
Yeah, I would say that these are definitely signs of burnout. So your mind being occupied by a project usually happens, when we work a lot on a certain project. And the problem is that if you can't rest, so if your mind is constantly in that, and this is the tricky part, you need to make yourself do something else. So if you play games for fun, but they're not fun right now, just try to play them. Try to play them for 1 hour, 2 hours. In my case, I don't really want to play anything when I'm burning out, when I'm like that. And I sit down and I make myself just go through the game, go through emotions. And at one point, let's say about an hour in, my mind is actually occupied with the game and not with the work. But this needs to happen on your own time, when you're off the clock, when you know that you've done all that you can for the project in the time you had, and this is your time. And you need to realize that right now you need rest and you need to do something that's not this project related. So this sort of helps. But honestly, if you are dealing with that type of burnout, I would definitely say just take a few days to rest up and get your mind off things if you can.
All right, thank you.
There you go.
Yep. First off, thank you for the talk. It was honestly great.
Thank you.
I have one question though. Like, you gave an example of like smaller studios of 2-3 people. What funds them? Like, how do people get paid in such small studios? Like,
Well, that actually has more to do with the type of projects you're working on and the type of people who would finance that kind of project. So, all these small studios, they need someone to finance the projects. They need a type of publisher or a client that you're working for so you can actually start moving. Otherwise, you can do it on your free time. And it can be fun, but it gets really draining and the process is really slow, especially when dealing with 2-3 people. But if you make a game or a prototype that's actually really interesting and you manage to sell it to someone, or rather sell your idea so someone would give you money for it so you can develop it further, then things can get fun, because then you will have some additional funding for additional people, and you will start to grow your team. And basically what will happen is what I was describing before. First off, you're working off a tennis table, and then actually you have a proper desk, you have proper colleagues, and at one point you are a collective trying to make a game. So unfortunately, it's a hard start. And something I really know from experience, because in my time, I've worked on probably 20 projects that had 2 or 3 people behind them, and I was doing sketches for them as a freelancer, and these projects went nowhere. Unfortunately, it's something that happens in this industry, but honestly, some projects do manage to go through. So it's actually how we started working on Cryo War with Kipi. It was basically our founder was the only one working on the project at the time. And the client said, okay, so I'll give you a bit more money and we can make some concept art for that, and we'll see if that can sell. So we made some concept art that actually sold, and we started hiring people.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was one first over there, and I'll get back. I'll get back to you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I have a question about the too many hats.
Too many hats,
When
yeah.
you wear too many hats, it's obvious that at some point you will begin to lack certain skills in an area. How do you deal with that? Have you had the question where you've done something some way, then after a few months you discover that you could have actually done it in a different way, which is better, or, well, not better, with more added value to it, and then you go like, why didn't I think about it that?
Actually, that's an awesome question, because this is happening right now, this week. All of my level design is starting to be redone a proper way, because as I knew at the time, I wouldn't be able to match a level designer who's at a professional level. But what I managed to make come across was the art direction of the game and the vibe we want for the game. So that actually worked. So it wasn't wasted time. But yeah, at one point, a professional comes in and says, wow, this is not done correctly. No, we need to redo it. And there are 2 things you can take from that. The first one is, oh man, I did a shitty job. This is horrible. I mean, why the hell did I even do this? The second one is, though, you look through what he's doing correct with your, all your mistakes and things you've done. And you start to wonder, okay, so why didn't I think of that particular thing? Oh, and this works like this, great. So if I put these things together, they work better than they did before. And you actually start improving because someone who actually knows how to do the job has shown it to you. So both things have value. The value of me trying to learn on my own and trying to push my head through bricks most of the time. And then the value of someone coming in and saying, no, this is how it needs to be done, and me recognizing, okay, this is the proper way to do it, and now I know how not to do it and how to do it. Sometimes it can be frustrating, but honestly, this is the part where you just throw your ego out, the window, and you start learning new stuff. And unfortunately, the downside of that is that sometimes this can drag the production back a bit. And this is something that the team needs to recognize, because it's something that happens because you're not good enough at your job that you're not supposed to be doing. So if the team is recognizing this and you're trying to make up for that lost time and trying to be as efficient as possible, that's great and nothing is lost. And at least that's the feeling. You don't feel bad for losing everybody's time.
Yeah, I think there is one more here.
Hello. I have 2 questions. The first one is a simpler one, and that is, how do you balance work and personal life?
Mm-hmm.
And slightly more complicated one is, what drives you? Basically, to explain what drives you a little bit better is, in your old age, when you look back at your life, what will make you proud the most? The projects that you work with, the people you work them with, or I know the journey, the skills you learned? What drives you?
Okay, so I'll answer the first question first. So how do you balance work life and normal life? It's hard. It's a constant battle, that, because sometimes we just need to do a little bit more work for the project to happen, and that takes time from our personal life. But honestly, what I've learned in my time is that you can set these times for yourself when you say, okay, so for these 2 weeks, I will give it my all and I will put in a little bit more hours to make this happen. And after that, my personal time is my personal time. And I'm doing only things that make me happy and my significant other happy, and no work. So we need to put, how do I say this? We need to draw the line somewhere. And this is different for everybody. But in time, as we get older, it's actually much simpler to just say, okay, as much as I enjoyed this work, it is just work. And I need to have my personal time and deal with my personal stuff outside of work on my own time. So we need to draw that line. And it's easier for me now. It was much harder a few years ago when I just couldn't do that. As you know, the example I gave, working 80 hours a week, that was absolutely destroying for me. And I tend not to do that anymore at all. Like, even if the conversation arises that, can you do this stuff now? I'm just, no, it can be done. I don't have the time for that. And this is it. For what drives me, sheer stubbornness, honestly, because I never feel like I'm good enough in a certain thing. So I need to prove to myself that I can be better at it. And it's a slow process. It's a horrifying process. I cry a lot at night, but it drives me forward. Other than that, I would say the process of making games is what drives me. The feeling of when I go to the office, I talk with my colleagues, the feeling of having lunch together, talking about games, trying to improve the things we're doing, being very happy when we manage to do something that's completely simple, but we didn't think of it before, and it makes the game all that much more fun or better looking. So these are the moments that actually drive me, even though there are many more frustrating ones. I tend to see the good ones more. And I would say that everybody should try to do that. It's a bit hard sometimes, but yeah, this is it. It's basically what's driving me is my team.
Thanks.
Okay, we have time for one more. There we go.
Were you ever in a situation where you weren't paid according to what the agreement was? And when did you decide it was time to move on from the company? What made you draw the line?
Yeah, that has happened, unfortunately. I've had a few situations like this. I've had clients who agreed upon a certain sum for a certain work to be done in a certain hour, in certain hours. And when that work was done, they basically said, well, this isn't what I want, so I won't be paying you. In these cases, it's very important to be very unemotional. So you need to do the math in your head. Okay, so if this person doesn't want to pay me now, but has paid contracts before, I can probably put in a few more hours to make him happy, so he will pay me, and I won't be losing like 10 or 20 hours of my time that will go completely unpaid. But then I probably won't be working with them again, because I have, this in mind, that the next project might be bigger and they might pull something like this. Now, if you have a proper contract, which doesn't always happen with freelance work, as we know, then you can actually say, well, this is my contract and it says so many hours, and you have acknowledged that I've worked these hours. You have acknowledged that I've made all the sketches, all the cover prep work, all the pre-final stuff. And now, as you see the final, you say, no, this isn't satisfying for me. This doesn't work. And we have a contract and we can go to court if you want. Another instance where it happened, it was a much bigger client that I had worked a long time with. Was pushing me to work overtime that was unpaid, just to get the process, the project working. And at one point, I said, okay, this isn't worth it to me. So you're basically wasting my time. And he agreed to pay half. And I said, okay, cool. I will take the loss. However, I want to renegotiate our contract because we actually had a contract. So we renegotiated. I put in my new price. They said, no, that's too much. We can't make it happen. And how dare you even ask for that much? So I said, okay, so we're not going to be making it happen. And the response I got was, yeah, you're probably going to regret this. And I didn't at all. So you need to know when to lose certain clients that are causing you headaches or causing you to lose money and time. And it's a tricky one because you need to be very certain that you want to do it. Another example I had with a similar job, I did it on time. I did it actually a few days early because I needed to travel. And I get a call the day I was traveling that I needed to do reworks. And I said, well, cool. Okay, when I come back, I will do the reworks and we're fine. And the person on the other line was super angry with me. He said, how dare you? Do you know how this industry works? And so on and so on. So I basically just did that with my phone, waited for about 10 seconds. He was still screaming at me. And I said, you know what? Okay, you know what? You've paid me quite a bit so far, and I'm willing to work with you. So let's have a compromise. When I come back, I will give you 2 days, not a whole week as you want, 2 days to make all the corrections you want for this project. I'll come in the office, we'll talk about them, we'll make them, and you have those 2 days for free. But next time, when we're working like this, when I'm finished within a deadline, I am done. Everything that needs to happen in that deadline is up to you. And I'm actually super happy I said that because we've worked with that person for many years after that. And it was great. And the next time we worked, I told him, okay, so you remember the thing I told you about the deadline? He was, yep, I know about it. Don't worry. I'll react accordingly in the time we're having together, as a contractor. And it worked, but it doesn't always. So when you're burning bridges, be absolutely sure you want to burn bridges. And also, don't be too afraid to burn bridges because especially if you're burning bridges with Bulgarian clients, Bulgaria isn't the world. I'm sorry, it's just not. There are many more clients out there and you can do better if you try to, if you try to find them. So don't worry about that. Just, try to be as objective as you can and try to be as calculating as you can in these moments and don't just slam the phone or start cursing at them.
All right, thank you again. A round of applause for Boris, please.
Thank you.